Good morning and welcome to the webinar, The Elephant in the Room, talking to your teen with a disability about love, dating, sex, and puberty. My name is Shannon Lindsay. I'm the training coordinator here at the South Carolina Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. We are glad to have everybody with us. I do want to mention that today's webinar is made possible through a sub-award from the South Carolina Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. You see all of the important information here on this screen. I'm not going to read it to you because you are all very, very smart. Just some housekeeping. The webinar today is being recorded and will be posted on our archived webinars page, which is on our website. You see here our link, which is www.teenpregnancy.org/learning center/online professional development/webinars. It will also be shared with the ARC, and they will post it on their website as well. We welcome everybody's questions today, but we won't be doing that via voice. We're going to ask you all to type your questions into the lower left-hand side of your screen into the chat box, and we'll answer your questions as we can throughout today's webinar. I'd like to give you all a chance to practice and to be sure that you all can hear us. So if you could please type a yes into that chat box, that'll let us know that we are broadcasting. Wonderful. I'm starting to see yeses come in. That tells me that you can hear us. Yay, more yeses. Outstanding. Always love it when technology works and works the way it's intended to. Just in case some of you can't hear us, here is the audio assistance. The connection number is 303-248-0285 with an access code of 771-7129, and I think you have to hit a pound sign. I've also typed that into the chat box to all of you as well, so you don't have to memorize it if you can't hear us. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the webinar over to my friends from the ARC of the Midlands, ARC of South Carolina. I'm giving you names. My friend Amanda Pollock is going to facilitate today's webinar.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. Like you said, my name is Amanda Pollock. I am with the ARC of South Carolina, and I am a project director here. I've been here for several years, and I've done a lot of work in this area. Our mission is to promote and protect the human rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we actively support their full inclusion and participation in the community throughout their lifetimes. And part of being included in a community means having access to education about the birds and the bees. It's something that we all need to know about, and in our society, it's kind of a taboo thing, and it's pretty difficult to talk about with our typically developing kids. So sometimes there are additional challenges when you have kids who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, such as autism, Down syndrome, just to name a few. This information is also great for parents or professionals who have kids with other learning disabilities, maybe just some kind of a delay, and it's actually just great for everybody to know this stuff, even if they are typically developing. So our training goals today, I normally do this as an in-person training, and I always start out by talking about the goals. They're the same today through this webinar, and that is to increase your communication between parent and child. I also talk to professionals and teachers who, in a lot of capacities, can almost function as parents. A lot of times you have people who are very trusted by children, and they find themselves in this role of having information to be able to give to maybe their students or someone in their faith community or something like that. So this isn't necessarily just for parents. It's really for anybody who has a loved one or you're working in a capacity where you are giving this information. So part of increasing that communication is having more effective conversations about dating, relationships, sexual health. You can add appropriate behavior in there, puberty, consent, even hygiene. That's a very big thing. Having conversations that are age and especially developmentally appropriate. And the biggest thing I see is that people are very uncomfortable in having these conversations, which, as I said, is kind of natural. And it is okay to be uncomfortable having these conversations. I do want to say that we have been able to bring this program to you from funding from the South Carolina Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. We've also received funding from the South Carolina Developmental Disabilities Council, and we are very thankful for that funding and for all the families and professionals that we have been able to reach through that. So ground rules, this is something I do in person, just to kind of establish some boundaries in our trainings. So obviously we're not in person, and the ground rule that I want to focus on today is that there might be some things that you don't agree with. Sex in our culture, it's very polarizing. We all come from different backgrounds, and it's okay not to agree with everything. But I do ask that you keep an open mind to the information presented. There's no such thing as a dumb question, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar using your chat box. And so I really encourage that. Also, I just want to say that this training is not intended to tell you or decide for you what your family's morals are or what your values are. Those are very personal. That's for you and your family to decide. This training is intended to help you communicate those morals, whatever they may be. So I always start every training by asking everyone to think about your own experiences, because believe it or not, the way you learned about sex and dating and relationships, the way you feel about it, the messages you hear in your faith community, those are all very important. So like I said, remember that's something for you and your family to decide upon. This training is not going to define that for you, and I don't want it to. I want that to be up to y'all to decide that. So I want you to just take a minute and think about how you learned about sex growing up, maybe who told you that information. I have a lot of parents and families who they did not have very open relationships with their parents. Sex was not something that was talked about. It was seen as something shameful, something that you did when you got married, and you're just sort of supposed to figure it out when you get there. I also have people tell me that they learned a lot from their peers at school. For me personally, I was a pretty sheltered kid, and on the bus ride to and from school, I would overhear conversations of the kids around me. And so I learned kind of informally that way as well. Some of us many of us probably have some form of sexual education in school, although that varies depending on where you live. A lot of people had older brothers or sisters or neighbors or people that acted as mentors, or maybe they saw what that other person or people were doing. So just take a minute, think about that, and then contrast that with, as an adult, how you understand and look at relationships, dating, and sex. One thing I always like to point out is that when we learn about things from our peers or from the movies, as we get older, there's often this, maybe not one specific moment, but maybe a series of moments where you realize that it's not the way it is in the movies, and what our friends told us wasn't correct. And I also want you to think about how much information, how many messages about sex we see, whether we realize it or not, on TV, on the internet, on the radio, in movies, on billboards, everywhere you go. And so that's, another issue in and of itself. But I do want to draw attention to this because if you are a person with a disability and the people around you or your family think that you don't need to know about dating and sex and relationships, you are still surrounded by all of these messages. And those might not be the most accurate or the most productive or healthy messages. And that can be very harmful to someone who doesn't have access to information. So I always tell parents that your kid is surrounded by a chorus of information. At least let your voice be one of the voices that they hear. So I do want to, obviously, we're not going to have a discussion about your experiences. I imagine that some of you have had experiences talking to your children, or at least trying. A lot of parents tell me that their kids don't want to hear about it, or they feel uncomfortable, and that's pretty normal, I would say, but that doesn't mean that the person in question is not listening or paying attention to your actions. So I want to emphasize something. I get a lot of parents and professionals, and I also do a form of this training for support staff and caregivers. And I just kind of want to say that you can't make somebody do something or not do something. And I hear a lot of parents ask, well, how do I make Johnny, do this, or how do I stop her from doing that? And I just want to say that this is really not what my training is about. That's really not, it's not possible to make someone do or behave a certain way unless you keep them locked in a room and so that they don't make any mistakes. That's not always a fun thought to kind of think about, that, we have to let people sometimes make not healthy decisions, especially for parents who have kids with maybe a more involved disability, where they could be easily taken advantage of. So that's kind of a scary thing. But what you want to do is you want to equip that person to make the best decisions that they can. And what you want to do is foster a sense of trust and respect between you and your child so that they are more likely to listen to you. Because we all know, when our parents said don't do something, we did it because we wanted to know. For people whose parents never talked to them about sex, y'all probably figured out how it worked at some point or another. So I think it's a safe thing to assume that eventually people figure things out. And you really want someone to have all the information available to them going into that, instead of letting them maybe make some mistakes that maybe could have been avoided had you had a conversation. So the next video, or the next slide, is going to be a video that I produced with some people with disabilities. They're all adults, but they vary in age. And I asked them the question of why parents should talk to their kids about sex. And hopefully this will play. Oh, click the play button.
In our own words, why we want parents to talk to us about sex.
Parents, we want you to talk to us about sex. We don't want you to be afraid or say, oh, my child doesn't want to do that.
It's okay and understandable that you may feel a little nervous about your child dating or being in a relationship, and it's okay.
Your child wants to do it, and if they don't want to do it, they want to, have it be introduced to them. It's their right. I'm not saying, go out and let your child have sex. I'm not saying that, but we think about sex. That myth about, oh, we don't think about sex, or, oh, they don't have relationships, or, oh, they don't need companionship, they just need friends. We grow up. We don't stay 5 years old forever.
I want parents to know that we all are human too. Plus, we have feelings. I'm 57 years old, and still, I get annoyed by people say they can't stay with me. No woman can stay with me or nothing because, see, they is under their rule.
We all have a right to date. That's what parents need to know. That people with disability, because we have a disability, that doesn't mean that we cannot date. That don't mean that we do not have the right to go and enjoy ourselves. That doesn't mean that we don't have a right to live our life.
Did anyone talk to you about sex and relationships?
No, ma'am, but fortunately, I had to learn on my own.
How did you learn?
Well, I just basically saw what other people was doing and stuff, and I said to myself one day, you gotta try some of that meaning to have a so-called girlfriend and see how it's gonna take.
Did you have parents who talked to you about sex and marriage and dating?
Yeah, my mom, she talked about sex when I was younger, but I wait. I said I always gonna wait until I get married.
Other people get to date and have relationships, but when you want to do that,
It's just that they don't want me to do it.
are they scared?
I don't know what they. I ain't scared, but they probably are.
Let's say there are some parents who they don't want to talk to their kids about sex or dating at all. What would you tell that parent?
But you need to listen to what they got to say, because a lot they can tell you, and they don't want to tell nobody else because you get paid.
First thing first, you need to trust your son or daughter, because if they don't, they're gonna go and sneak out. But I mean, that's the number one thing that they need to do.
What about the myth that people with a disability, they don't want to have relationships or they don't want to have sex?
So that ain't true. I got a disability. I love being in relationships. I love having sex. To me, that's supposed to be a thing in a relationship.
I thank God that I'm dating somebody good,
What is good about your relationship?
that we trust one another, we call each other, we talk to each other, but we have respect for one another, and we do love each other.
Let us live our lives and let us take control of our life. This is our life.
All right. I do love that video. I think all of those individuals are just so well-spoken and passionate. And I just kind of want to reflect on a few of the ideas presented in that video. You had Trevor, the young man who loves having sex. I always kind of gets a laugh when I show that video. But he's a guy in his mid-20s. I think that's probably pretty typical of someone in that age. And you also, he talks about how nobody really showed him or talked to him, but he sort of was left to figure it out, and he did. And then you have Kim, who is the young woman who has a good relationship. She's planning on waiting until marriage to be sexually active. They trust each other and respect each other, and her mother, was very influential in that. So I love that video because I feel like it shows that, if we had assumed that none of them were listening or capable, that could really set them up to make some not great decisions. So the next thing I want to transition into is the biggest concerns that parents have that I hear. These are things when I was doing some research and surveying and doing some interviews and focus groups, these 5 or so things always came up. So the very first thing that people would always say was that they were very worried that someone would take advantage of their child. And that is something to be aware of because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are at a higher risk of being sexually abused than their typically developing peers for a variety of reasons. People have more access to them because sometimes they'll have a caregiver who has to bathe them or just feed them, be around them all the time. People with disabilities can be very trusting and not really know if somebody is trying to take advantage of them. They also are seen as less credible by the people around them, including law enforcement. So if something does happen and they say something, they're not as likely to be believed. So all of that to say, education is extremely important. If you do it for no other reason, then let this be the reason that you educate your child or your teen. If there are parents out here and your child is in his 20s or 30s, start now. It's not too late. Anything is better than nothing. So at the very least, children should know what the correct names for their body parts are. They should know that there is such a thing as good touch and bad touch. In general, bad touch is someone is touching them that they don't want to be touched. That doesn't necessarily mean a sexual kind of way, but especially in a bathing suit, in an area where a bathing suit covers. I also think it's important to let them know that sometimes caregivers and health professionals, like when you go to the doctor, sometimes they need to touch those areas to do a job, but it is not romantic. They should have a basic understanding of consent, which can vary on the child's age. One thing that is kind of trending now, I would say, in this world is the idea that young children should not be forced to hug or kiss family members. I grew up in a family like that. I'm sure many of you do, and we don't really necessarily see that as harmful, but when you think about it, by forcing a kid to give grandma a hug or give Uncle Billy a kiss, you're basically subtly reinforcing the message that their body is not their own and that they don't have a choice with who they show affection to and that they are obligated to show certain people affection. Unfortunately, abuse does occur within families, so that can kind of set sometimes a harmful precedent for a child if they're given the message that they don't really have a say and that they are obligated to be, romantic, or not necessarily romantic, but affectionate with someone. So as a child gets older and to the level that they can understand, teens and young adults need to learn that in order to do romantic behaviors such as kissing, hugging, holding hands, having sex, and everything in between, both people have to say yes to that. So the idea of consent. If someone threatens you in order for you to say yes, that does not count, and they need to tell someone. And if that person doesn't listen, they need to tell someone else until somebody does listen and believe that. This is probably geared more for typically men on the autism spectrum, young men, teenagers, 18, 19-year-olds, even in their 20s. They can have a hard time discerning the age of other people, and I see this a lot, men in their 20s with autism looking at a 13-year-old girl and finding her attractive. So the idea that a child, even if they say yes to certain behaviors, that doesn't count because they are a minor and they're not able to say yes. You do really want to be mindful that you are giving the idea of age-appropriate consent, especially because kids can look older, they can lie about their age, so that's really important because I have done research and seen where some men on the spectrum end up on the sexual offender list because they didn't really receive proper education about this, and they don't have the social skills to kind of figure that out. They need someone to be very clear about that with them. Again, if anyone is forcing them to do romantic behaviors or telling them that they need to keep something a secret, they need to tell you or another trusted adult. Kind of the other end of the spectrum is that children should also learn that there are positives to sex and intimacy. Sometimes we can be so negative and for good reason, we're scared, we don't want anything bad to happen, but you also want to portray that there are good things to sex. And that can look like a lot of different messages, that sex is done with something you love, with someone you love and trust and you've known for a long time, and it is something to look forward to, but it's not something to rush into. And these are all messages that are not exclusive to people with disabilities either. Intimacy is also, it goes beyond sex. Holding hands, watching TV together, spending time with someone alone, those are all intimate behaviors, and they don't involve sex. Yes, age-appropriate consent, that is definitely something that as kids get older, they definitely need to understand. You can foster consent from a very young age in all forms of communication, just as simple as asking a child what they want to wear or what they want to eat. You don't need to always honor that if they want to wear, a tank top in 20-degree weather. But the point is to give them choices, and as much as it's appropriate, respect those choices, because that lets them know that their choices are to be respected and they can say yes or no. Many times people with disabilities are taught to be very compliant because it's just easier if they say yes or tell the answer that people want to hear. And that can be a little problematic, especially when it comes to intimacy, relationships, and dating. So we are going to go through some signs, potential signs of abuse, and how to maybe spot that and what to do about that. Another very popular objection to talking about this kind of thing, and again, this is across the board, this is for, I think, everyone, not just people with disabilities, is the idea that this information is going to corrupt the innocent children, or that it's going to give them permission or give them ideas that they don't already know about. So I am here to tell you, and I'm sorry, but your children probably are not that innocent. I don't mean that in a negative way or a bad way, but it's just a reality of the world we live in, the messages that kids hear in the hallway, in the locker room, on the bus, through social media, on TV. The messages are there. And so kids, even those with disabilities, even when you think maybe they don't get it, they may not get it the way that you or I get it, but they definitely are aware most of the time of relationships and dating, and they know something goes on even if they don't understand exactly what. So again, even if you think your child is so innocent, the fact that they are at a higher risk of being abused, that's, again, a great reason to start having these conversations. Kids know a lot more than you think. I see evidence of this all the time in what parents tell me. One example, I was doing a phone interview with a parent who said her son is very innocent, he's like a child, and he doesn't, I haven't talked to him because he just doesn't get it. So then the next line, she told me that he was in his room and she walked in and he was masturbating. And then I asked her, well, how did he figure out how to masturbate? And she kind of was silent for a minute and said she didn't know. And so to me, that illustrates the point of you figure it out. I mean, we've been procreating for thousands of years without sex ed. We've managed to figure it out. So it's pretty likely that the next generation is going to do that as well. There's also an idea that we have kind of in the disability community where we describe people as maybe what we think their mental age is. We say a lot of the time, oh, he's like a 5-year-old. He has the development of a 6-year-old. She's really like a 7-year-old. And it's kind of natural that we do that. A lot of people, or not a lot of people, but I mean people with disabilities do have developmental delays sometimes. They are very trusting, kind of like maybe a child would be. Maybe they like Disney movies, they like to color, they like to do things that we would associate with children. And so it's natural we draw that conclusion, but I just want to caution you in thinking that because they did also go through puberty. Their bodies are those of adults, and they do have that hormonal aspect to them, and they have desires, and they have drives. And they might not understand it, again, the way you or I do, and especially if they're not getting any education in school or from their parents, nobody bothers to tell them about these changes and what they can expect. That can be very confusing, and it can lead to frustration, self-esteem issues, depression, what we call behaviors, and acting out. And I see that a lot in my work, especially in day programs with adults. You do start to see a lot of behaviors, and then it's like, oh, what do we do about the behaviors? As an example, I was working with a group home in the state, and it's an all-male group home, and they actually told me that they started having social events with the female group home, and those behaviors dropped. And I imagine it was because, you know, most men and women want to socialize with people their own age, and even if it's not romantic, I mean, we want to be intimate with people even if it's friendship, and sometimes even more than that. And people with disabilities are really not any different than that. Another question I get is, how will I know if my child understood the information? And I hear that a lot from parents who have kids where the disability is more involved, or maybe they are nonverbal. There are a lot of ways to tell whether someone understands information. So first, I would say think about what you've taught your child before this. How have you taught them other skills in life? And have them communicate to you what they understand. So I just did a training last week, and these are with adults, but this is somebody who had a moderate disability. I used a lot of pictures. I said things very simply, 1 or 2 sentences, and then I asked him to tell me what he understood. So I didn't ask him a yes or no question, which is very easy to just say yes or no, or what you think the other person wants to hear. I asked him to repeat back to me what he understood. I asked him questions based on what I was presenting, which I'll actually share with you, the tool that I used. And then we did a role-playing scenario. So this individual has a problem staring at women, inappropriately making them uncomfortable. He also wants to work in the community one day. So we created a role-playing scenario where I pretended to be a customer. He was pretending to sweep the floor at the grocery store where he wants to work. And I walked in and asked him where the bananas were and walked away. And I had some other people in the room with me, and after the scenario was over, they said out loud, they said, hey, you know, you stared at her while she walked away. That's not appropriate. So we did the scenario again. The second time, he did not stare at me inappropriately. So that was a really great way for him to act out the skills that we were talking about, and to really see what he was understanding. So repetition is key. You're going to have to do this, I mean, maybe once a day, and it might be for weeks on end. It's very dependent on the child. Some kids like to do quizzes. I would say maybe practice putting a condom on a banana might be a good tactile way to teach something. with the understanding that the banana is not the thing you put the condom on, because our kids can be very literal, and so you want them to understand that the banana is a stand-in for a penis, and not, okay, when you have sex, you put a condom on a banana and you're good to go. Prompting them to identify appropriate behavior in public, so putting it back on them to tell you what information they understand. I hear a lot of parents, they will tell me their kids will say that they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and it's sometimes someone the kid doesn't know or they saw once. So using that as a talking point, asking them, well, why are they your boyfriend or your girlfriend? What do you like about them? Have you known them for a long time? Those are all ways to start conversations and see what they understand as well. How will I know what to say is another big one too. Many parents are uncomfortable, and that's okay. I would suggest that you should admit if you're nervous or uncomfortable. I think that's actually a really great way to approach the topic because it lets your kids know that you are a human, and this isn't the easiest thing to talk about, but it also gives them the message that this is important, and that's why, even though you feel nervous, you want to talk about with them. So usually in my in-person training, we will practice having conversations, and obviously we won't be able to do that today. But some good places to start would be to use teachable moments. And so an example of a teachable moment is kind of like what I was talking about in the previous slide. If your child says they love someone, well, what does it mean to love someone? Why do you love someone? That can be a great place to start. If you're in the car, you kind of have a captive audience there. So lyrics that come on, songs, asking them what those lyrics mean. If they see a pregnant person walking by, that can be a great way to start a conversation. One parent told me, and I think this was so neat, there's a show called The Secret Life of the American Teenager. I've never watched it, but apparently it deals a lot with teen pregnancy and sex and that kind of thing. She would actually watch that with her daughter, and after each episode, they would talk about the show and what her daughter thought, and it was a really good way for the mother to assess how the daughter was understanding and processing information. So one thing she was able to figure out was that her daughter thought you could get pregnant by kissing someone. So I know some parents' reaction is, well, good, now they won't do anything. But I do think that that's an opportunity to correct some of that misinformation and, let them know, actually that's not quite true. And you can use, I've got some resources coming up that you can use to have those more, explicit conversations about sex and puberty and all of that. So another parent told me she doesn't think her son understands dating or relationships. He just doesn't get it. But he makes a lot of comments, she said, about he wants to get married, he wants to have a girlfriend, he loves his female classmates. So to me, I don't agree that he doesn't get it. I think he does get intimacy, and he craves it on some level. He wants to get in a relationship and married, and those are things that lots of people want. And so I challenged that parent next time he said he loved someone or that he had a girlfriend or that he wanted to get married to ask him, why does he want to get married? What does he think it takes to have a good marriage, and explore that and not just brush it off. Also, I want to add, it's okay if you don't know all the answers. Ask other parents. We actually have a Facebook group that you can join. It is called Elephant in the Room Parent Forum, and I will repeat that again at the end. You can ask other parents for help. There are a lot of online resources. Ask a nurse or a doctor to explain sex to your kid if you really feel that uncomfortable, and that's okay. Or maybe another family member, an older sibling, an older cousin. I do see a lot of families where there's kind of someone who's more comfortable and they're kind of a spokesperson about this kind of thing, and that's perfectly okay. So just a little bit on effective communication. I've pretty much kind of stated all of this before, but using picture books from a young age, the earlier these conversations start, the better. You don't need to go into a lot of detail when kids are little. You can just say something like, the good touch, bad touch idea, where their bathing suits cover, that if anyone ever touches them there, that's not okay. That's probably what they need to know at that age. Being very literal, so not saying things like the stork brought you or things like that, that can be very confusing for kids, especially with autism. They just don't read into things like that. They take things at face value. So simple and accurate explanations will make learning easier, and I do have some examples of that coming up. Another thing is try not to shame your child for acting on urges. The most typical thing I see is masturbation. I take the professional stance that masturbation is a behavior that's part of a healthy sexual identity. That is not something everyone agrees with, and I'm not asking you to. That's okay. I would say that it's a lot easier to manage a behavior than it is to completely get rid of it, especially when you're talking about a behavior that comes from a primal place or hormonal urge. Those kind of sexual desires, they can be, kind of hardwired into us, and I know that might be, you might not view it the same way, but I think most of us can come to the kind of common ground of sex is something that, we were designed for, and that, there's a lot of positive reinforcements around that. So that's why I take that stance, and so a lot of parents might have a problem with that, or they just don't know how to handle it. And so some ways to manage that is making sure that that behavior is done in a private place at an appropriate time. So a bedroom at night is an appropriate time. In the middle of the living room during, dinner or whatever is not an appropriate time. So one mother told me she had an understanding with her son. If she knocked on his door and he said he was busy, she just knew that he was having some alone time, and she just would leave him alone. And I think that's a great way to instill a sense of trust. If you are very overbearing and you do not allow your child any privacy as appropriate, that can be very damaging, and you can start to see some behaviors result from that. So it's important to give appropriate levels of trust and privacy to foster that relationship. And again, it's also very good for them to receive positive messages about sex, dating, and relationships, not just don't do that, don't touch yourself, don't do that, that's wrong, that's gross. So those are all very kind of shaming statements. A better way to handle something if your kid is touching themselves inappropriately is that, hey, go do that in your bedroom. That's for private time. So another great skill or concept for your children to understand is a public versus a private place. So in a private place, the door, like a bedroom, is usually locked and people cannot see you. Bathroom might be a good example of a private place. At school, the bathroom's really probably not a private place. If your children are older and maybe they are working or have a job, it's really not appropriate to be in the bathroom for 20 or 30 minutes masturbating when you have a job to do, which we actually see that with some of our individuals who are older in the workforce. So making sure they understand that they can do things in private and they can have alone time, and then giving them that space and maybe, working out a system like that mom did with her son. So the next thing I'll show you, I love this. It is from a curriculum called the Circles curriculum. This is one of the tools I use a lot when I talk to individuals with disabilities, kids and adults. So this curriculum actually has a DVD video component to it. It's very in-depth, and I borrowed this one element of it to show you how you can use this with your family. So it all boils down to this diagram, these circles, and the idea is that we all have these circles. So we all have a purple self-private circle. That is our own space. We all have that. That is a very special place. That is, your deepest thoughts when you're alone in your room and you have privacy. We are to be respectful of other people's private space, and we are not to enter it without permission, and people are not to enter ours without permission. So you get into the idea of consent here. And so it kind of goes back like when I was talking about not forcing your kids to kiss their aunt or something, not forcing them, in somebody else's space or having someone else force them into their space. So the people that we let very close to us, those are people that we've known for a long time, people we trust. And if you look beyond that, you will see the blue hug circle. And those are people most likely that we live with, such as our family members, maybe very, very close friends, where it would be appropriate to hug them. We trust them. We know that they're not going to hurt us. You also see the sweetheart shape there. That is in between the self circle and the hug circle. And that is, somebody, usually one special person that we trust and we've known for a long time, and we agree to be in a relationship with them. They agree to be in a relationship with us, and they are very close to us right there. So I want to kind of pause because a lot of times parents will tell me their kids think that they're dating someone when they're really not. They see someone at school that they think is pretty, and then they come home and say, oh, that's my boyfriend. So you can use this as an illustration to say, well, okay, you say that person is your boyfriend or your girlfriend, but really what circle are they in? Because as we go further and further, we see at the very outside the red circle, the stranger circle. That's someone, we don't know who they are. We see strangers every day. We don't know their name. It's not really appropriate to hug them or kiss them or be intimate with them, or sometimes even to talk to them. Sometimes strangers can go from being a stranger to maybe an acquaintance, which is the yellow circle, to a friend, which is the green circle, and maybe they get to the hug circle or the sweetheart circle. So this is a very simple visual way to explain social distance and also explain what it takes to be in a relationship with someone, because I hear that a lot. People with disabilities, they sometimes don't understand that. They're very trusting. They think anyone who's nice to them, that's all it takes is one time being nice, and now I trust them and this and that. So some other ideas to hit home is that in your sweetheart circle, no children are to be in that circle. And that can change a little bit if you're talking to a 12-year-old. It's okay for one 12-year-old to date another 12-year-old. It's not okay for an 18-year-old to date a 12-year-old. So to simplify that message, I would maybe say, stick to people your own age, just to kind of simplify that, because that can get a little bit tricky with consent and high school and teenagers and things like that. So stick to people your own age. If you are out of high school, it's probably not the best idea for you to be dating someone in high school because you really don't have much in common. You're in two different places in life. Community helpers, that is the orange circle. That is for police officers, firefighters, teachers, doctors. Those people, and I kind of do want to add this, like we mentioned a little bit earlier, they might have to touch us as part of their job. A doctor might have to touch us in private places as part of his job. A firefighter might have to touch us if we need to be rescued, and that's okay. They're just doing a job, and it's not anything romantic. So the next slide just shows some of the guidelines. You're unique. Everyone has their own set of circles. No one can come into your inner circles unless you want them there. You cannot go into someone else's unless you want them there. If someone is trying to enter your circles, especially your purple private circle, and you don't want them there, then you need to tell them to stop or move away, or if they keep doing it, to tell someone else. People can shift circles. So usually it's best if someone doesn't move from the outside, like that red stranger circle, to the inside very quickly. And this is just a summary of what I was saying. I have a handout, and this is basically from the handout. So just kind of some other things, the green friendship circle. These are, again, people you know well. People can kind of go in more than one circle. So you can have someone in the friendship circle, maybe they're in the hug circle too. Friends are people you have things in common with, you've known them for a while, you know they're not going to do anything to hurt you. An acquaintance, maybe, you know them, but you don't know too much about them. You would not tell them anything private. Those are all some great ways, some great messages use to explain nuanced concepts. Like social distance is a very nuanced kind of concept. So another way to use this, once you've explained these concepts, is asking your child, what circle do you as their parent belong to? What about their siblings, their neighbors, their teachers? If they're nonverbal, they can just point. So that's why I love this, because, it just kind of crosses so many barriers with that. Ask people, is it okay to hug and kiss people in the red stranger circle? Last week at the training that I did with the individual, we did that role playing, we went over that stranger circle a lot because he has a lot of issues with approaching strange women in public and making inappropriate comments to them. So I asked him what circle I was in. It took him a few times, but eventually he was able to say stranger, and then I asked him what made me a stranger. And it, again, took him a few times, but eventually he was able to tell me that it's because he didn't know me. And I reinforced that. I probably asked him that 5 or 6 times in the hour that we were together. So for me, it felt very redundant, but for him, it was very helpful. So again, like I said, the idea of consent can be illustrated because both people have to agree to be in the sweetheart circle together, and they both have to agree to do romantic behaviors together. And those romantic behaviors really only happen in that sweetheart circle. They don't happen in the other circles. You can also have them make a list of what behavior is appropriate for each circle. Make it a game when you're in the car, seeing people, what circle would they go in, things like that. So next, some signs of sexual abuse, and I won't read all of these. I do want to say that these need to be taken in context. Sometimes these things can be changes, like from another stressful event or something like that, so you do sort of need to take everything in context. The other thing I do want to say is that many abusers pressure the victims to keep the abuse a secret. So one way in terms of prevention you could use is reinforce the idea that there should be no secrets between you and your child, that they can always come to you and tell you just about anything. And if someone is forcing them to keep it a secret, then they need to come to you, and it's okay to tell you about it. So changes in behavior, inappropriate sexual behavior, sometimes our kids will repeat things they've heard or seen. So if you see them doing something, repeating something that is maybe explicit, and it could be just something they heard on TV or something like that. It's not necessarily always a bad thing, but replicating an act on themselves. Obviously, if you see any signs of an STI, bruising, anything like that, sleep disturbances and bedwetting, maybe some new questions about sex, which also just could be questions because they're curious. Abuse can also take the form of them being asked to send photos of themselves, and there's not always changes as well. So taking all of that into consideration, and then also keeping in mind that most abuse happens at the hands of someone the victim knows. There's a lot in the media about the stranger danger, and just be aware that that's typically not the case. So some signs that you should be aware of, and again, take this into consideration with everything else. This is not meant to freak you out, but someone who's maybe overly involved in the child's life, insists on hugging, touching, or kissing them, always wants to be around the child alone. Maybe the child isn't comfortable being around them. Maybe that person is constantly trying to babysit or give them gifts. Too good to be true kind of scenario. Just have your radar up for that. And if a child does disclose to you that they have been abused, you might feel angry, shocked. You might not believe it, but a really good thing to do is to take them at their word. Reaffirm them and reassure them that, you are glad they told you, that you care about their safety. Do not judge or scold them. Determine if the abuse is ongoing or if it's in the past. Is the child in immediate danger? Do you need to contact authorities? Or is this something that maybe happened, maybe a while ago, it's not still ongoing, but do you need to follow up with something like counseling? So in terms of prevention, obviously you can't, unfortunately, prevent everything, but again, the education, reinforcing that no one's allowed to touch their body without their permission. The child should be able to identify several adults that they trust, if they had to come to somebody with that information. And that tip is basically what I talked about not making your kids hugging kiss people they don't want to. So now we're going to talk about puberty very quickly. You can begin talking about puberty, I think the earlier the better. Just as small children, you can ask them, what makes boys and girls different. They usually kind of start to figure that out. Some children begin puberty as early as 9. So you want to start before the onset and make sure your child is aware of changes in the body that they'll experience. So you might say something like, okay, one day you're going to turn into a man, you're going to get taller, you're going to grow hair under your arms, you're going to grow hair on your face, you're going to be a little bit stinkier, the girl's hips are going to widen, the boy's penis and testicles will grow, and they'll start to produce sperm and semen. Girls are going to develop breasts, and girls are going to start their period generally about 2 years after their breasts begin to develop. So again, this is just like anything else, how you've taught them anything else. Use repetition and pictures. I have a great resource in a couple slides that I'll share with you. You can say something like, you won't be a little kid forever. You're going to grow up into a man or a woman. Your body's going to change. It happens to everyone, and it's normal. So hygiene is something that I think some people have some struggles with. So some ideas for hygiene, maybe making a shower playlist together. When the song changes, it's time to wash your hair or another part of your body or something like that. Making a hygiene kit together, a morning kit. So maybe that's got your toothbrush in it and some face wash, and a nighttime kit that can have some things that, maybe, again, toothbrush, floss, anything like that, deodorant. Use the appendix. I will explain that in a minute. Also consider the texture of washcloths, temperature of the bath water, things like that, especially kids who have some they're very sensitive to certain sensory input. That might be preventing them from doing some of these hygiene tasks. Erections. I put this in here because a lot of parents, I get this question all the time. What do I do when my son comes to the breakfast table and he has an erection and he doesn't realize it? So some things to do in that situation would, again, be to not shame him, but just to maybe gently pull him aside and say, hey, I think you just need to maybe go to your room and put some pants on and just come back. So some of the other things you can try teaching a boy is that erections are normal. Sometimes it happens when they're feeling romantic, but sometimes they can't help it, and that's okay. And sometimes you're going to wake up with one, and when you do, that's okay. But wait a minute before you come to the breakfast table, because that's a private thing, and that's not for everybody to see. Especially if you've got younger siblings, it can just kind of be embarrassing sometimes, and the kids can call it out. And so you just want to make sure he understands that it's okay, but that he should really be in private when that happens. So if he's at school and that happens, then he can sit quietly until it goes away, or maybe he can ask to go to the bathroom. And if he's at home, the bedroom or the bathroom is a good place to be. He doesn't need to tell everybody if he has an erection. And boys also and men get wet dreams. So a great way to explain that is, sometimes when I wake up in the morning, your underwear is going to be wet, and that's just because your body is changing from a boy to a man. And so you can take off your dirty pajamas and your sheets and tell your parents that they're dirty, or you can clean yourself up. So this is a social story, and it basically has very simple way to explain the process of growing up. And this is all within the resource that I'm taking this from a specific resource that I will give you the full link to, because it's absolutely fabulous. It's got how to explain puberty basically to both boys and girls. So very simple language. For example, sometimes when I touch my penis, it will get harder and longer. This is called an erection. In a few slides, it talks about how this is private. I'm not going to talk about that in public. That's just one example. This first then board is an activity you can do with your kids if they're really having a hard time with hygiene. Maybe they really don't like brushing their teeth. Maybe there's some kind of reward you can give them to incentivize that. So first, brush your teeth, then 10 minutes of cell phone or whatever it is. and these are just a few examples. I do have the link to the full manual in a couple slides. Periods are a big thing for girls, obviously, and how to explain and deal with them. So it's a really great idea to explain to your daughter before this happens, because it can be very alarming if she starts bleeding and she doesn't know what's going on. So explain what she's going to see and feel. So she might feel moody, tired, you might have cramps, you might try using red food dye to simulate blood in underwear or the toilet to let her know what it's going to look like. Make sure she understands that periods are private. Maybe y'all can talk about trusted adults, that if she gets her period, she can talk to about it, especially away from home. Maybe a teacher is on that list. It might look like talking to a teacher and letting them know that, you know, you want them to be aware that maybe she's about to start her period, or you think she might, or she has started her period, for them to be aware. Teaching her to be discreet with menstrual products. It is recommended maybe to start with pads. They're easier to use. It's also more obvious when they need to be changed, and you can help that by giving her a choice of pads, kind of pads she uses, going through together, maybe using some together, putting it in her underwear, and practicing that skill, practicing rolling it up in toilet paper, throwing it away, and transition to tampons if desired. And that is up to you and maybe up to the mobility of your daughter or her desire to do that as well. So, again, one other thing that they emphasize in this manual is to discuss what to expect of the gynecologist, because that can be a little interesting experience for women, especially if you might not know what to expect. So just letting her know that, you know, they might have to touch you in private places. There is a visual in this appendix that I will show you that tells you what will happen in an exam. And this is another social story, and it is a step about how to use the pad, and it also has kind of a little narrative on the side here of some examples of what you can say. And this is all coming from this wonderful resource called the Healthy Bodies Toolkit. I want to leave that link up. Please go there, download it. There's a manual and an appendix. You can print it for free. Obviously, it's so large I could not, give the whole thing in this PowerPoint, but it is so helpful. I've given it out to many people, and it's got plain English. It has activities you can do with your kids. Please download that. It is really great. If you can't remember the website, Healthy Bodies Toolkit, Google it, and it will come up. Very quickly, social media. I get a lot of questions about that, and I'm kind of just very quickly going to say, again, it's a lot easier to manage something than it is to eradicate it. Cell phones are part of the world we live in. So if your child is young, maybe giving them a phone that doesn't have internet access, or giving them very limited access to the internet. There are apps and things you can use, but some really great things for kids to know is that it's not okay to send pictures of themselves, dirty pictures of themselves to other people. They can, and people have been charged for distributing child pornography doing that, which is pretty scary, but our laws really have not caught up with that. It's not okay to tell people where you live. It is not okay to answer messages from people you don't know, or to look at pictures of other children with no clothes on. But reinforcing that the internet is a great tool, and maybe you give them some access to the internet, and after they prove to you that they can be responsible for it, giving them some more access to the internet and the computer and social media. Putting the cell phones up at night when they go to bed, and then they can have them in the morning, that's a good idea. Not having them at the dinner table, that's a great idea. Having them, not making it so they're not in their room watching them. Maybe they have to watch the iPad in the living room with no headphones on. And I think as they get older, you can allow for some more freedom. I do want to kind of get to does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? I know we're pretty much out of time, but I wouldn't mind taking one or two questions.
So as we discussed at the beginning of the webinar, questions are to be typed into the chat box. The chat box feature is in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We've had some folks type in already, and this is a great time to ask some questions or seek some clarification. One of the things that I'll say say, Amanda, is that a lot of the information you presented today isn't predicated on somebody having a disability.
Right.
It's just fantastic information to share with young people. The idea that this isn't just a talk, that it is a conversation, that it starts early and that it continues throughout childhood and adolescence, I think is fantastic. So we have a question, and the question is, will you put the website back up about the body? Absolutely.
I think you were talking about the Healthy Bodies Toolkit. I will put that back up. And are you able to send a message, my contact information to everyone?
Yes, we will send everyone an email. I think we have all your contact information, but we can send your email to them as well, or we can type it in right now.
Yes, and Shannon is going to type in my email, so you can always message me, email me with any questions. And I do want to remind y'all again, we have a group on Facebook, the Elephant in the Room Parent Forum. You can search for it and join it.
Okay, it's
Amanda P.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions, any concerns, anything like that? And I do want to say, yes, a lot of this information, almost all of this, it's not specific to people with disabilities. The real key is making it accessible to people with disabilities, and that can be very difficult. Or we might just not know where to start with that. So repetition, using pictures, using TV can be very helpful in doing that. And I do want to say, kind of last thing, the most important thing is always to model the behavior that you want to see. So treating everyone in your house with respect and trust and dignity, and your child. That's, if you do nothing else, that is really the most important basic thing you can do. And you are welcome. I was very honored to be able to present this information. I do hope that it was helpful.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you all for joining us today. If there aren't any additional questions, we will end the webinar. I will tell you that we recorded the webinar today, and we'll post it on the South Carolina Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancies website, as well as making it available to the ARC of South Carolina. I got it right this time, Amanda?
Yes.
But we'll make it available for them to post on their website as well. I'll also say that the video that Amanda shared is available on YouTube.
Yes.
So it's not, it's pretty easy to find. So you can go onto YouTube and search for In Our Own Words and find that video. I think it was a phenomenal way to hear from young people with disabilities exactly what they need with regard to sex education and treatment from family and friends. So thank you all very, very much for being with us, and we look forward to having you with us again. And again, we will post the webinar. It won't post today. It'll probably take us about a week, but it will get posted, and we will email you all Amanda's email contact information and let you know when everything's up on the website. So thank you all very much. Have a fantastic